my name is Ernst. I'm the creator and writer of Soulfinder Demons Match, which is my series on combat veteran exorcists who take on a demon called Blackfire until the end of time.
Oh, I am Brian Ball, one of the writer-creators of the comic book Rags, a story about two salty veterans extending the zombie apocalypse in California just for the TDY money.
Nice. I write the Punchline comics. It's a comic book about a superhero who gets fired who then has to train her replacement, and they don't get along. That's pretty much it.
Cool. I don't know if we just go to the questions or you want to kind of just start.
I'm pretty sure we should talk about stuff first.
We can talk about process before we exhaust their questions.
Oh, yes. Process.
Yeah.
So what's your process, Doug?
I'll let Bill start. Bill actually has the most impressive resume in comics over here, so let Bill go first.
He's just saying I'm old. I've been working in comics off and on since 97, 98. Oh, yes. And what I do when I'm working on a project or I'm trying to spin something up like this project is, excuse me, I will try to figure out what core will continue to spin out drama. So what I did was I stole some elements from classic writing, classic TV, classic movies. You could say that there's a little bit of Lethal Weapon or Odd Couple in the pairing between a bitter World War II generation burnout and a millennial kid. They just see things completely differently. One of the things you're supposed to be doing in every scene is putting in some conflict. So I wanted even the downtimes to have them arguing about the ethics of, well, just putting a bullet in the bad guy, saving yourself a lot of work down the road, versus the millennial kids saying, well, you take away that person's chance to, get a good second chance to redeem themselves and that kind of thing. So I wanted it to work on a core emotional level, which would highlight some of the action. So that's the way I built Punchline. How did Rags come together?
Oh, I was drunk, just like now. So Rags kind of came apart. I tell the story like a billion times. Me and my best friend Trent, who's not here right now, we were playing the zombie game Left 4 Dead, and I had modded it to be really, really naughty. So I apologize. I'm not a straight man like that. But I modded the game to be naughty. Trent found out and he teased me about it. And at the time I was really intoxicated, and I was trying to just justify the reason why the game was modded the way it was. And eventually that all came out. But through the process of actually writing the thing, I actually initially scripted out like you would do like a normal Hollywood or a normal comic book script. And then as I was working with Luigi, I found that English isn't his first language or his best language, so less was more. So I have a very panelized, or not, what do you call it?
I use the spreadsheets.
Yeah, I use a spreadsheet system.
In those cells.
So I'll have a page, and a page will be like one set of cells. It'll be panel 1 through 4, and I'll just say, have this person punch this guy, have this do this, cartwheels, and he just draws the rest, and it really just comes together. So I had to learn to take maybe 142-page script and burn that all down to like a couple sentences.
Wow. How about you, Doug?
Cool. So Soulfinder came about because I was not happy with the mainstream industry. The comics I grew up reading, a lot of the heroes, they're no longer heroes. They don't even really do anti-heroes so much. They lack a moral compass. So I wanted to do stories where it was just pitting good versus evil, and there was like no question that that's what was going on. So I was like, okay, well, you can't get any more evil than a demon or Satan. So that's my bad guy. And then I was like, all right, I want to put him up against someone who is a fallible human being who's got problems, but they have a functioning moral compass. So I came up with the idea that I would have these guys that went to war and they saw the worst in humanity and came out of that with their faith intact. So they still believe in God. They got out and they realized that the real battles that we are fighting are spiritual battles. The physical wars we face are really a failure of spiritual the idea of having like an Iraq, Afghanistan vet who got out, went to seminary, became a priest. Each diocese has to have an exorcist, and I was like, okay, well, I could have a mentor-mentee relationship. His mentor is a Vietnam veteran who is part of this major order of exorcists as well. Okay, well, they're dealing with supernatural things. We need to have somebody who's kind of not an everyman, who doesn't know about the supernatural. So they have a friend who's called Detective Chua, and he's religious, but he's not, familiar with demonic warfare or whatnot. And so when he has a problem in the community, he sort of comes to them. They want to keep it under the rug and says, we got this issue. We don't know what's going on. Can you help us out? So he's sort of like the everyman. And between this mentor-mentee, everyman dynamic going on, I thought you could tease out some good stories out of that. And with demons, one of the ways that they go after people is they go psychological warfare. They can go into your past. They can see your childhood. They can see the times where you had moral feelings, where you were a coward. Deep down you knew you were a coward, but you didn't want to tell anybody that. And so they can exploit those sort of things. So these are all the sort of dynamics that I sort of worked into Soul Finder.
There you go. I like that Detective Chua kind of functions as the Watson for the whole thing. So you've got usually him paired up with one of the soul finders, and he's the stand-in for the audience who gets the explanation, which makes the storytelling a little bit easier.
Yeah, the third book, which actually just came out today, I had a couple people that I sent it to that I trusted. They read it, and they were like, actually, I would behave just like him. So when the priests are confronted with the demons, they have to live up to their calling, or they try their best to do that. They don't always succeed. But Chua is a guy who, when he's taunted by someone who's possessed, might just punch them in the face. Because there's only so long you could be punched before you punch somebody back. If you're a human being, you've got emotions too. So
how much research did you do into basically the job of staff exorcist within different churches?
So that's something where there's a couple priests that I trust. Father Steve Bruneau, who's somebody who he's the CEO of the Word on Fire Ministries on YouTube. I've gone to him multiple times. He's caught little things that I've missed. So there was one time I referred to the demons as eternal. And he was like, no, Doug, demons are immortal. They're not eternal. And it was like a goof on my part. So I go to these priests and they catch little errors that I make. And then there's numerous books that I read. Father Gabriel Amorth was the lead exorcist of the Vatican for many years. He recently passed away. Wrote a number of books on exorcisms. Father Ripperger, I recently co-interviewed him with a friend of mine on YouTube as well. And he wrote recently the book on exorcisms. If you want to know anything about exorcisms and how demons affect people on a minor and major level, that's the book for you. And then there's another one that's only for priests as well. But
it sounds like there's a home version of that. Is that accurate?
They don't want people knowing certain things because there are weirdos that will pretend that they're possessed and they try and trick priests. So it's sort of like CSI, where there were people that were actually getting ideas about how to commit certain crimes by watching CSI. And so there are certain things they do not want the general public to know about. So like, his book is something like, 500 or 600 pages that normal people could read, and then the priest one is like 800 pages or something like that.
Wow. So Brian, how does your background inform the writing on Rags?
So basically, I'm one of those guys, I kind of got tired of reading about how Spider-Man and the Green Goblin are going to fight once again for the final time, or how Batman and the Joker are going to fight once again for the final time. You only tell the same exact story over and over again before it gets stale. So one of the things that we want to do with Rags is, I have a lot of military humor in my book. So I took a lot of my experience from, being in an Iraq invasion, being in Fallujah, seeing all the things that I've seen during those deployments, and I put those in this book. There's a lot of, we can call it casual racism, but like for anyone who's been in the military, there's a lot of back and forth and things that you say to each other as battle buddies and best friends that you can't really say out in public. And I wanted
We
I
can tease your
hope-
friends a different way than you can tease strangers.
Exactly. So like I wanted to see that more like in the book. So I kind of wrote this more for me, and if anybody else enjoyed it, that was a bonus.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's there's just a lot of just twisted humor and things that I think a lot of writers shy away from because you're too scared to offend somebody. But you know, being creative and basically being a creative person or artist, you have to push those limits. You have to, you know, say like, hey, there's the limit, there's the line. Let me step over that and see how far we can go.
In my case, I read a bajillion comics, and like you, I got tired of seeing the same patterns repeat, and the world's greatest detectives not able to figure out those patterns and things, so I decided to write something that I hadn't seen before. So in every script, I try to put in something interesting or something that is surprising or something that makes me laugh. So, you know, the trick is to get in something new, not necessarily just create a new character because you hope that it shows up in a movie and you get a check down the road somewhere. So, that's what I did.
That's awesome. One of the things like I really appreciate about Punchline, I'm not sure how many people here like watch anime or manga, but you'll have a character like Kamen Rider, and there's like 18 bajillion different Kamen Riders, but they're all unique in their own way, and that's something I think we fell on the Western side. You know, we can have multiple Spider-Man, but they're not really unique in their own way or whatever. But what Punchline did was it actually gave like that passing of the torch, passing of the mantle, and that mentorship that you don't really see, you know, in Western comics. Like, well, I'm going to take Spider-Man because it's the easiest one. We have Miles Morales Spider-Man, and we have Peter Parker Spider-Man. What would be great is if we could see Peter, one, grow up and not be the goofball that he is, and actually mentor Miles and, hey, when I fought this guy, this is the way I took him down, and then Miles puts his own little spin on it. But that's why I don't read Big Two comics, is that everything just, it's the same plot rehashed over and over and over again.
My inspiration for doing Punchline was a little bit different. The first thing I started looking at and working with was the old Shazam TV show, where Mentor, the dude's name, and Billy Batson would drive around in Winnebago and solve super problems that only Captain Marvel could solve. I said, well, it really wouldn't work for a modern audience, but what if Mentor was kind of an irritating creep? Like, well, that's something. So I started going from there, and that made it more fun. And then I had to justify, well, we still want Mel to be an interesting character. She has to be kind of an interesting creep for a reason. So that's lined out in the issues as they should.
One of the things, so for me, I would actually kind of have a question for Bill. So with Soulfinder, none of my characters have superpowers at all. And I like to explore this idea where I put them in situations that are extremely intense. So they're in the middle of the ocean and the boat goes down or it explodes or whatever, and then they're all alone in the middle of the ocean. Or they have to rock climb in this Tibetan sort of country or something like that. And I like to put the reader in a situation where it's super intense, but they're like, maybe I could do that. Like if I had to save my wife, if I had to save my brother or my best friend, would I be able to do this dive so many, you know, how deep into the ocean, or would I be able to rock climb or do this or that? And to me, putting ordinary men in extraordinary situations is kind of cool and helps create that drama as well. Like how do you do that? How do you do that with a superhero like a Superman or something along those lines? Like I haven't done it. I obviously read enough comics where, you know, I think I would have the idea, but I haven't done it myself. So it's like something like, how do you create that drama for someone who has the power of 10,000 suns?
Well, I try not to ride on that scale because I find that scale to be kind of ridiculous at some level. But you basically just amp up the scale of destruction, but it's the same basic principles. It's, I'm going to punch you, you're going to punch me, I'm going to outsmart you, you're going to outsmart me, and just the last person standing wins. The hard part is to avoid the Spider-Man Green Goblin loop where, you know, the bad guy comes out and does terrible stuff and isn't actually punished and just kind of skates away to do it again. I mean, you see enough of that in real life, you don't need to see that in fiction.
Yeah. That's why I set my comic in California. So you can destroy that place, no one will care. I mean, you might actually win an award.
Yeah. Oceanfront property in Arizona, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. No one likes California.
It's super easy to bag on them in Texas too.
That's fair.
Especially in Austin, they keep moving there and buying stuff and then voting.
You know, funny enough, my sister just moved to Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah. One more. We're taking over.
So I come from Reno, and years ago, like, it was, no traffic whatsoever, and you're just by yourself, and it was like really nice. And then over the past couple of years, every time you're in a restaurant, you hear someone just like, I just moved from the Bay Area, and like the traffic is like it never was before, and so it's just like, oh.
And yet you can't shoot those people with paintballs.
And they always made fun of Reno years ago, and now they're all moving there. But I digress. So.
Yeah.
One day Reno's going to be the new California. I
In
apologize.
some restaurants, it already is. So, I got to do a new thing recently. I'm writing a Punchline and Tomorrow Girl crossover for Antarctic Press. And my process is I just wrote out a couple of big paragraphs, and they signed off on that. So I wrote down a page-by-page section of, description of the action. Page 1, Jessie and her mom are having lunch. Page 2, they discuss how Jessie's doing at being a superhero. As if on cue, page 3, a supervillain shows up. So I'll break everything down into something manageable, and then I'll sit down and when it's time to actually, once everybody else has signed off on it, I'll actually bang out those pages and get them done. What is you guys' process for actually putting words on the page?
So the first thing I do is I get heavily inebriated. And then I try to pick a thing. I try to pick like a theme that's very, very simple. For the first section of the first story arc was Rag was Regina just wanted to find pants, and I just built the story around pants. Right now I'm doing the crossover with Black Ops and Punchline, and so that question I wanted to ask was, how far would you go for your battle buddy? And for those of you who don't know, like your battle buddy is kind of more than a brother. It's more than a best friend. It's somebody in your life that you know their name, their last four, their underwear size, you know what their sleep pattern is, you know absolutely everything about this person, and that relationship is really more intimate than being married for most people. And I just wanted to ask, because I know how far I would go for my battle buddies in the military, so I kind of was like, okay, if I could get to every piece of Afterlife to bring back one person, how far would I go and what would I be willing to sacrifice? And so once I got that question answered, I just,
The rest of it made sense.
The rest of it made sense. I had like 3 Modelo's and just hit the keyboard and just done. Actually for this script, I've actually rewrote it like 14 times because there were just some things that I felt weren't hitting the right chords. Because I've had friends who they put their battle buddy they placed their battle buddy more important than like their own relationships, like their own marriages, and I saw how those things got wrecked, and I wanted to like showcase that and replicate that.
Yeah.
So going back and calling up old friends, like, hey, remember when this happened? Can you tell me the whole story about that? And hearing the whole stories back from like old friends, and then taking pieces of that and applying it to like the characters and how they actually act. So that's kind of like my process. I talk a lot to my old military friends, a lot.
Interviews are good. You hear things from other people you might not necessarily come up with on your own. What about you, Doug? What's your process like for putting together a Soulfinder script?
So, like I said before, I was not happy with mainstream comics years ago before I started this series, and one of the reasons I wasn't happy was because they weren't writers and true storytellers. They were often activists that were masquerading as storytellers, and
That hasn't changed.
they would use their activism as a cudgel to beat the reader over the head and say, if you don't agree with me, then you're a bad person. So I was like, okay, I want to avoid that. How do I avoid that? I want to find universal questions that relate to everybody. You don't need to be a Catholic to like the Soul Finder series. So the first book, for example, the core question I wanted to ask was, why do bad things happen to good people? And that's something where across lines, bad things happen to your battle buddy, bad things happen to your mother, we all get sick, we all die, we all, at some point in time you're gonna get cancer or a heart attack or something, and somebody you love who's a very good person, bad things are gonna happen to them. So like, that's my question. Okay, well I got the question that's universal, now what do I gotta do? I gotta think about the character and situations that I might place them in. What's something that happened to Father Redder that actually his battle buddy, his main guy, he was in an IED blast, and so there's that, and there's other things that happened to him. So then usually I set aside a certain amount of time for research. So it might be, okay, well, I want to read Fulton Sheen's Life of Christ, or something along those lines. Books that tie into these themes that I want to explore. I want to find the best and brightest that's ever been written on these subjects. And then I'll go through, I got my highlighter every time I see something, that's a good idea, that's a good idea. I can tease that into a script, okay. But you could research forever. You could research till the cows come home for a year, and then you will be writing. I need to be writing. So I got three months, I will do research, and then I will start writing. And once I feel like I can speak with authority on these issues, then we're gonna go from there. And usually I'll find that kind of key situation that starts the ball rolling, and it'll just kind of go from there. And then oftentimes I just get like insomnia, and when my brain knows that I have a problem I'm working on, I'll wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I won't be able to sleep. So for 3 hours I'll just kind of like stare at the ceiling and kind of put the story together.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you're thinking of what sparks your interest to write a story?
Well, I had somebody approach me and say, I'd like to pay you to write a script. And I said, I'd like to write that script. What do you want to see? So it starts, in part, if you're as mercenary as I am, about coming up with something that is fulfilling as a creator and hits all the notes that your client wants. There's a lot of different ways to make comics. You can make them and put them online. You can make them and self-publish them. You can make them and crowdfund them. And a lot of the ways that people make comics now, they don't have any accountability to anybody else. In my case, I'm not the people that have to sign off on things. So I try to get my best idea, send that over to them, work it back and forth. With the Punchline stuff and some of the other things I'm writing, I try to think about what kind of story I want to tell, what position I want to put certain characters in and see how they do. I want to, find a place to market these things, because the more you get paid to write, the more you can afford to write, Shoot.
If you didn't have somebody tell you what you want, what would you write about if you didn't have somebody?
Well, I'm writing the Punchline book. When I first met Matt, we talked about working together, and then a couple of years later, our schedules both opened up, and I said, we met in our favorite burrito joint, and I said, I've got a couple of ideas. One's about a superhero who gets fired and has to train her replacement. And he said, what else do you have? I said, well, I've got this story that's a little bit Big Jake, a little bit Lord of the Rings, about a kidnapped prince and the guys that are hired to steal the kid back. And it happens in a high fantasy world. It's like, okay, let's talk about that story, that superhero story again. So, one of the things that you deal with when you're a writer and you work with other people, face a lot of rejection. And if you're a guy that's got one idea, you're a guy that's got one idea. You have to show up with several ideas that you can execute on, that has to all be in your portfolio. If you compare the world of comics to the world of making movies, you need to go in with 2 or 3 pitches on you, one thing you want to talk about, and then if somebody asks you what else you have, you need to take advantage of that moment and say, well, I've also got this, and I've also got this vampire thing, and whatever else.
Yeah, do that in business.
Yeah, you've got to be.
You work on this. Yes, I can work on this.
It is sometimes hard to sit down with people, so when you sit down with them, you really need to be prepared.
Yes, you do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any
I think we're gonna open this up to questions.
I'll answer his question as well.
Yeah, good idea.
So, in terms of Soul Finder, so for the first one, like I was saying, the why do bad things happen to bad people, the impetus for that in many ways was you want to do this thing where it's like paradoxically something that's really close to your heart, but at the same time you need to like step away from yourself and be objective about the situation, because if it gets too personal, you're not going to be able to tell the character's story or whatnot. And so for me, it was a situation, I'm going to try not to make it weird, get emotional or something like that, but so someone in my family was at 9/11 on ground zero, and in terms of faith, because that's what the story focuses on, basically both of us went different directions after 9/11. So somebody like was angry at God essentially, and me personally like went closer to God. It was just like, I'm gonna give God a hug or whatever. And so the story was basically about like, okay, the way people respond to this evil in the world and the problem of pain, as C.S. Lewis would say, is people are going to basically take sides. They're going to either get angry at God or say God doesn't exist, He can't exist because something like 9/11 wouldn't happen if there was a loving God. Or you can have people that say like, no, there's free will, God does exist, and what the price of having free will in some ways is some people are going to choose to do evil, but that ultimately free will and being able to willingly choose love is the greater good in the grand scheme of things, in the cosmic sort of, I don't know, overall picture of something along those lines. So I try and tell stories that are extremely personal, but then, like I said, there's the you behind the you who's more objective about everything, and try and tell it from that sort of
It's gotta
perspective.
be the hardest part of your, to me, that would simply be the hardest part of your writing, is taking yourself out of the picture.
Right. And then finding, that's the other thing, is if you're telling the other side, you want to treat that side with respect, because there are serious reasons and logical reasons why someone might come to the conclusion, even though I'm Catholic, someone might come to the conclusion that God does not exist. And I don't want to belittle them as a writer, I want to respect them. And like I said, the story and the characters come first, and if you tell these multi-layered stories, people, whether they're actually there was an atheist who was one of the biggest supporters of the first book, Demon Smash, and I probably got more support than him from a lot of Catholics who were upset that there was a black mass in my book or whatnot. So if you tell the story right, you're going to get a large swath of the population that likes it, no matter what they believe.
Thank you.
Well, my answer, I feel like I'm a little bit more chaotic. I try to find the most dumbest thing I can possibly think of and see how entertaining I can make it. So if you can at least laugh or chuckle at least one bit of the story, then I've done my job.
Aren't dumb things funny by nature?
Of course. It's ridiculous thinking of like a ginger running through a small town in California just hunting for pants, and that's all she wants. I think that's the most hilarious thing. But how do you make that good? How do you make that relatable? Those are kind of like the questions I ask myself. So when I get told a lot, like you just have a smut book, or you just have like the zombie titty book. But like if you actually read the story, there's more to it than just, you know, this lady running around a town naked hunting for clothing.